Yo, what's up guys? It's the new sensation, Big Annotation here, and today I'm here with the deck that I took to the recent online regionals for Europe, and I ended up placing, I believe it was 12th place that I came with this deck. It was somewhere in the later stages of the top 16. I ended up going 5-2, 5 wins, 2 losses with the deck, and that deck is the Self-Control Android 21 deck that has been recently cropping up. This deck is a really fun deck. It's a really nice alternative to Gamma because obviously I'm primarily a blue player and also a bit of a black player now as well. And so being able to play a blue deck in this game or in this current format that isn't Gamma feels really nice because Gamma is like the most linear and boring deck that I've seen in like a really long time. And it's also been around forever, so like I don't really want to just be stuck to that one deck if I want to play blue for formats upon formats upon formats. So it's really nice to see this come to popularity, and I'm a big fan of just Android decks in general, aside from Gamma. And so it's great to see that like this deck has picked up in popularity and that it's, you know, the new support that it's got is really helping it to be quite a strong contender. And yeah, it's a really fun deck. It's got all of the pros that green-blue androids tend to have of like cool energy manipulation and all of this other stuff, as well as a little bit of hand control in there, although this deck is obviously a bit more focused on the hand control aspects of it. But yeah, it's a very entertaining deck to play. I won't say that it's not toxic, it's not broken, none of that. Like, all of you guys that are obviously crying constantly about the deck just need to stop, to be honest. It's not broken, it doesn't need to get banned, none of that stuff. It's a fine deck, there's ways to counter it, there's ways to play around it, there's ways to adapt your playstyle to make the deck like much worse than it would otherwise be. It's by no means broken or anything like that. And that's just shown by the fact that obviously you're losing games when you play this deck. I didn't go undefeated in the tournament. It's not at an overwhelming popularity, but the other people who are playing it, I think I was the only one to make top 16 with the deck, so it's by no means broken. The deck has been doing what it has done for a very long time. It got one new card, which makes it slightly more consistent and more punishing to play against if you don't know what you're doing against it. But if you know what the deck does and you know what the card does, you can very easily play around what this deck tries to do. So I don't think it needs banning. I don't think it needs hitting necessarily. It's a fine deck. I'd say it's a strong deck. It's not broken. It's toxic for sure, but it's not broken. You can play around everything that it does. You can, there's ways to absolutely like entirely mitigate what this deck tries to do. Having said that, I do feel like this deck has very few bad matchups right now, which is why I chose to play it. I didn't end up playing against any red all day. I think my matchups were round 1 I played against Trunks Cheetah. Rounds 2 and 3 I played against the new Android 21 from set 20, which is definitely the worst matchup for this deck that I've come across, and that was the first time I'd also played against the deck. I managed to win one of those games and then lost the second one, and I won against Trunks Cheetah, and then I believe I played against Green Majin Buu, which I won, and then I ended up playing against the Mirror, which I lost. I think I lost to a misplay on that one. There was a slight play that I could have done a bit better in that game that maybe could have clinched it out for me, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure because it would have changed how the entire game went, I feel like. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if I would have been able to win that one had I played differently, because it's such a hugely different play that I would have taken anyways. And then going into the last 3 rounds, I think it was, I know I played against a Majin Vegeta in the last round. I played against a Gamma as well, and I can't remember what my other opponent was playing, if there was even another opponent. Maybe I've miscounted at this point. But all in all, like, some fairly meta matchups. Like, most of those matchups are pretty like top tier decks at the moment. I'd say only the Green Majin Buu was like maybe in the rogue category, but the rest are all decks you'd expect to play at a tournament, and this deck was able to take games against all of them, which is good to see. Like I said, set 20 Android 21 is definitely the worst matchup for this deck that I've come across. I was really hoping to play against some red this tournament because I feel like this deck can do quite well against red, and I also just kind of wanted to test it out a bit more against red because I have been testing it against like Sin and Gogeta quite a lot, but I wanted to kind of take it into the into the real world, into a regionals, and see what, you know, people are playing with those decks at the regionals, and see how the deck does against those in that format. So unfortunately I didn't get to play against any red, but still 5-2, not too bad. Top 16 with this deck I'm very happy with. And yeah, it's a deck that I'll probably play for a little while because it very much fits into my playstyle. But we'll break down the deck. We'll go into the deck profile. Like I said, I feel like other than set 20 Android 21, this deck doesn't have any like auto loss matchups or like tricky matchups, to be honest. I feel like set 20 Android 21 is really the deck that is that feels like it shuts this deck down as well. But there are also, like, in any deck there are just ways to play around this deck if you play against it. You don't have to be playing set 20 Android 21 to be able to mitigate what this deck does or anything. I guess I'll cover the leader because it's a fairly, like, you know, it's an old leader. It's got some old cards in. So the front side is pretty simple. You swing, you draw a card. You awaken at 6 or less life. If you have a blue-green multicolor in energy, you untap 1, draw 1. So there's no like alternative awakening, which is a big weakness to this deck. You have to go down to 6 life, but it's also a 6 life awakening, so it's at least it's not 4 life kind of thing. On the backside, you have a permanent. You can't play battle cards with energy costs of 6 or more, so if you play against this deck, don't side in Jiren. They're never going to Turning the Tide you. And Jiren doesn't really do much against this deck other than that, because it has to trigger on counterplay. You can't just counterplay your opponent using a super combo for the 12th time. And then the auto is when a card in your energy is put into the drop area by one of your skills. You draw a card, you put a multicolor green-blue from your drop area to your energy in rest mode, and then at the start of your opponent's main phase, you untap 1. And this is really nice, obviously, because it's an interesting way to basically just say draw a card, but with like an extra condition on it. But the main plus side of this is that obviously you can tag in and out what's in your energy, and because it's blue-green androids, you have a lot of options of like things that you can play from energy, or specifically things that you can pick up from your energy in this deck. So I guess the main card of the deck is the super combo. We have 4 Android 18 Bionic Blitz. The reason we run this is because it's a multicolor super combo that you can put back in your energy, and then you have a whole slew of ways to pick this up from your energy back into your hand, and then just keep super comboing out of attacks and bottom decking your opponent's hand slowly. It's really fun. Not fun to play against, I can promise you that. But it's very fun to play because there's a lot of interesting, like I said, energy manipulation and trying to figure out when's best to use your leader auto in a turn to pop the energy, or like use ways to pop the energy to trigger your leader auto so that you can then pick these up optimally. It's, yeah, very interesting. And then figuring out also when you need to use these aggressively, because you can then just pick them up immediately from drop to energy, energy to hand on the same turn, or if you want to save them for defense. But generally, the general rule of thumb with this card is you want to have 1 copy in your energy and 1 copy in your drop. And the reason why is for the promo, which we'll get into in a second. And a lot of the time, if you ever get to the point where you have 2 copies in your energy, is when you start using these next cards to just, which solely pick it up from your energy, rather than like doing other stuff as well. So speaking of which, we have 4 Master Roshi. When it's comboed with, you pick up a multicolor from your energy, you put down a card from your energy, from your hand to your energy in rest mode. So this is copies 9 to 12 of your 9 to 12, no, 5 to 8 of your super combo, because you pick up your super combos. And then Speedy Sub, this has been an energy switcher for a very long time as well, used in a lot of Android decks just as a top 5 searcher, but this deck, it is even more snapped because you get a lot of use out of the second auto, which is at the end of the turn where this card is played. You can pick up a card from your energy and put down a card from your hand to your energy. So again, you do that with your super combo. If you ever get 2 copies of your super combo into energy, you play this, search top 5. And again, it's very important to note the top 5 search doesn't have a cost restriction, so you can search your secret rare. And then at the end of the turn, you just grab back a super combo. And then the new card is the promo, Android 21 Trading Places. Barrier 4K. At the end of each turn, when this card is on the board, you can choose to put up to 1 of your energy to the drop. So this is the first of your kind of energy switches, because obviously at the end, you need to be blowing up your own energy to get your draw power and energy fixes going from your leader. So this is the first of those, and it's got barrier, so obviously great protection there. It is only a 4K, so it is important to note against yellow it will get hit by that Gohan Videl that especially Golden Frieza uses to get through the silver bullets. But just generally against yellow, they can sometimes side that in against you to pop this card. So it's a bit more risky to play this against yellow, but other colors, most of the time you're fine. Corrin's Tower in red can hit this, but I don't really see people siding that card, to be honest. It seems like a very weird card to side at the moment, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, I'm not a red player though, so... but the main power of this card, obviously it makes your deck more consistent because you have more kind of energy fixers or energy binners, I guess, that you can find, and especially this one you can play it on turn 1, which obviously means it's down for most likely the rest of the game. But the main power of this card is the first auto, which is limit 1, you put when it's used in a combo, you put a card from your energy to your drop, and then swap a card in your energy with a card in your hand. The reason why this is so good for the deck is because it is the first way that we have to trigger the leader's auto on the opponent's turn, which means that this card, you get to bin an energy to swap a card with an energy in your hand, but then it also triggers your leader auto to draw a card and replace the energy that you binned. And because of the way that the leader's auto is worded, you untap the multicolor at the start of your opponent's next main phase. So if you use this during your opponent's turn to bin an energy, you effectively, as long as you then bin an energy on your turn as well, you get 2 untaps going into your opponent's next turn. So the reason why I said earlier that this card, it made the deck more consistent and more punishing to play against rather than necessarily better. Obviously it made the deck better, but there's very much ways to play around this card because you just like don't swing at leader until you can try and go for the kill or like have big pressure turns. Because if you're only swinging once or twice a turn at the leader, they're just going to combo this, swap their super combos back to hand to use for the next attack, and then use the leader to just draw and replace this, and then they get 2 untaps at the start of every one of your turns, where you could just be limiting it to 1, and then bricking up their hand with copies of this because it's a limit 1 auto. So this is a very strong card for the deck, don't get me wrong. It's the new card, it's kind of pushed the deck into competitive play, but it makes the deck better, but it doesn't make the deck broken. It makes the deck more punishing. You just have to play around it. Like, genuinely, I'm not saying that as a cope. You just play around it. And then going into the unison, we have the Zamasu unison. So this goes really well in tangent with the promo. It's just a 3-cost 19k blocker, and it's got an auto +1 when a card is put from your energy to your drop area. It restands and draws a card. And obviously this works with your whole deck, just like wanting to put your energy to the drop area, and every time this turns, this becomes another draw, basically. And another attack. This is like your main pressure piece, to be honest. Most of the time you're just swinging 19k with this, putting an energy to your drop, and then restanding it, drawing a card, and swinging again 19k with this, because a lot of the time your opponent's just going to focus this down next turn, so the blocker doesn't really matter. And if they're not focusing this down, then you're probably getting a lot more value, because you can then trading places and then draw 1 off the unison and restand it as a blocker to defend with, and then drawing 1 off the leader and swapping a super combo back to your hand. And this is again why you want a super combo in your energy and a super combo in your drop, because when you use trading places going into your opponent's turn, you can then grab a super combo from your energy, and then when you trigger the leader auto from the trading places, you then put another super combo back into your energy. So you just keep cycling them like that. There's like 3 parts to the cycle, which is getting the super combo to your drop, putting it to your energy, and then putting it to your hand. And if you set it up so that you have 1 in your energy and 1 in your drop each turn, this card completes 2 of the 3 parts of that cycle. And the 3rd part is just using a super combo, so that's really not that hard. But that's why this card is, like, so good. It does 2 of the... It does both of the things the deck's trying to do. The deck's trying to fix your energy and swap it back to your hand, and it does both of those. And then going into the main other energy binner or fixer, I don't really know what to call them, but also a check land. The old key channeler from, I think, probably the starter deck, I don't know. It comes from something. This guy is a 14k barrier. He is negating his own energy exhaust if you have 5 or higher life. So it's quite nice to stay at high life with this deck. You want to stay around 6 life if possible, because that's obviously when you awaken. And obviously the new secret rare has great synergy with this card, because there will be times where you secret rare and it just makes this card a check land again when it shouldn't. This guy has an activate main where you pay an energy. So you have him in your energy, you pay an energy, and then you put it to the drop area to play himself. So he basically plays himself from your energy, but he has to specifically go to the drop area as well, because it will trigger your leader auto. But you can think of it like the Gamma 3 drops, where they pay an energy and play themselves from energy. It's just that it also triggers your leader auto. So you basically just pay an energy, pay him in the, you have him in the energy, this is impossible to explain, I don't know why. You have him in your energy, you pay him, put him to the drop, put him to the board, lead a skill. That's why. The main thing to watch out for with this card is that if you're doing that on turn 2, which a lot of the time is when you're looking to awaken, and I'll explain that when we get to the Z deck, then you want to make sure that you have a multicolor in your drop area already, because this guy, whilst he goes to the drop area, he then plays himself, like I've just tried to poorly explain. And so when you do that, you need to make sure you have another multi in the drop area to replace with your leader auto. So ideally either a super combo or the next card, which is the Android 18 Measureless Strength, which is obviously just a simple discard top 5. But in this deck, it's especially good because it fills up your drop area with multicolors, which you can then start using if you're running out of like super combos in the drop to put into your energy. You can just use this guy instead. And it's also especially good because, again, it's a check land, but also it works really nicely with the Super 17. So the Super 17 is another check land, but he's also got a skill in your energy again. You pay 7, you play him, and then you play up to 3 androids from your energy that cost 5 or less. So this guy, it does have an arrival skill, which does come up sometimes, to be fair, because you're running the multicolor super combos and all. But when it's played, you choose a card from your opponent's hand and board and bottom deck them, and it's also a 25k crit. So a lot of the time you can just end games by tapping 7 for this guy and playing like any combination of these and Bad Omens, and just like ruining their hand and critting them down from like 4 or 3 life to 0. It's very fun, trust me. Going back to the key channeler, there's a skill that I forgot to mention, which is that whilst he's on the board, he's also an energy fixer, because he's got an activate main, which isn't once per turn, but you're probably only using it once per turn most of the time, where you can put an energy to your drop area to choose up to one of your opponent's unisons and remove a marker from it. This is actually really strong, because there's a lot of unisons that this deck would otherwise struggle to deal with, that this card just like completely melts through. Take the Gohan unison in yellow, for instance. This card is perfect for dealing with that. Like any unison that comes down early, as long as you get a turn 2 awaken off, you can have this guy on the board and then follow it up by turn 3 dropping the Zamasu unison and just swinging everything at unison. You have 2 swings from the Zamasu, 1 from your leader, and then an automatic marker removal from this guy. So like if you're going first against SS4, you can just rip apart their unison the turn that they play it. It's really, really nice. But most of the time this is just like a case of, again, it's another skill that puts a card from your energy to the drop to trigger your leader and unison autos. But those are the, I guess, 10 check lands there. The Android 17 is a conditional check land, so you do want to charge him over the others throughout most of the game before charging the other check lands. And then going into the final kind of multicolor Android stuff, we obviously have 3 Bad Omen. Sometimes it does come up that this card also bins an energy because you run out of like Android 17s or Android 21 promos, or you might just have really bricked, and then there'll be a turn where you might need to remove something. You don't have a way to bin your own energy, so you just play this from energy, bin an energy, kill something, crit a life, because why not, and then you trigger your leader in unison to keep your hand healthy. Yeah, this card is mainly just like a win condition. A lot of the time it can get sided out to 2 copies because the tap 7 is like really not that reliable. It's really, I think I only tap 7'd once throughout the whole tournament yesterday, or not yesterday, on Sunday, whenever it was. Most of the time you just like slow burn them with these because you want to play around cards like Death Blaster, Frost Deadly Poison, Cold Bloodlust. And granted, not a lot of colors will have cards like that. But when you're against those colors, it's important to play around, and a lot of the other colors will either be trying to kill you, or you'll have the opportunity to kill them with these guys before you get to the chance of tap 7ing. So the tap 7 doesn't come up all that much, but it's obviously a really broken effect to have in the deck, so why would you not run it? And it's a check land anyways. And then Bad Omens, a lot of the time just playing them one by one is going to be your win con instead. But it's also really nice because if you don't need them early on, you can just chuck them to the drop, and then you can put them back into your energy later with the leader skill, obviously. And then the secret rare of choice is going to be the Android 21. This is probably like one of the few secret rares that you can play in this deck because you can't play battle cards that cost 6 or more. So all of the 8-drop secret rares like Baby Hatch and Beast Gohan will get their effects off. So I mean, Beast Gohan doesn't get its auto off obviously, but Hatch would get its counterattack skill off. But then they instantly just like disappear because you can't play them. But yeah, this card is broken, and then the fact that it's searchable as well is dumb. The fact that if you ramp it, you can then add it back to your hand from energy is dumb. Card's just dumb, to be honest. Like, anytime you draw that card, it feels broken. In any deck, not just this one. In the other Android 21 deck, in Gamma, I guess. I've not really tested the card in Gamma because I haven't played Gamma in a long time, but yeah, dumb card. And then we have a Self-Awakener here, the Android 17 Restrained support. This guy is you pay 2 to play him, and then you can also take a life. It's really nice because this card gets around like T-Blow or any other counterplay because it's all in the activate main to take a life. And then he's got another activate main, which makes him another energy binner as well. But it's sometimes worse, sometimes better, because you have to place a blue-green multicolor from your energy to the drop, but then you can also choose a battle card and KO it. So it's really good removal, but it means that you can't start charging mono blue energy and then putting it to the drop to fix it with multicolors, which is a lot of the time what you start to do when it gets later into the game, because you run out of check lands, obviously. You can just start charging mono blue and then putting it to the drop and replacing it with multis anyways. So that is one of the downsides to this, but it's a really strong early game card. It helps you self-awaken, obviously. In a best of 3 format, I'd probably run more of these, but we have more in the side because it was best of 1 pre-side for the regionals. But yeah, really strong card. Really nice early game for early board removal, because like you probably don't need to charge mono blue early on because you can see a lot of your check lands, especially with the top 5 Android 18 searcher. And yeah, pretty good card. Then last multicolor of the deck, we have 4 Kusu. I just love this card. This card is like one of the best counterplays that they've printed in a very long time that isn't just like one of the free unison counterplays. And it's in a color combination that can utilize it very well because it's in a blue color combination where like 2 energy is actually not that much energy. But yeah, very strong card, and if you don't see a super combo, which can happen, even though they're searchable, it can happen where you won't see a super combo very early on. You can just use this as your like pseudo replacement to a super combo and start cycling this instead, because you can pay 1 to combo it and then make your opponent bottom deck 1, but you can also just like play them to counterplay whatever your opponent's playing and then also make them bottom deck 1, which is very strong. And against any sort of like mid-range or aggro decks, this is going to be a huge card that you look for. Like against Sin, SS4, and Majin Vegeta, and Trunks Cheetah, and Golden Frieza. Basically against red and yellow, which are like the 2 aggro mid-range colors, I guess. This is what you look for. And then going into the defensive package, we have 4 Defending Friends because the card's a bit dumb, to be honest. And it's also searchable in the deck, so again, why would you not run it? 4 D-Magics and 3 Bean. The reason why 3 Bean is basically I'm keeping the list to 50. I see a lot of lists for this deck going to like 52 cards or 54 cards. I'm a very strict player when it comes to deck building. I will not go above 50. I did consider for this deck going up to like 52 because there is like no space in the deck. All of the stuff in the deck is like mandatory, and then it makes it very tricky to sideboard. But I managed to stick it to 50 anyways because, like I said, I'm very, very strict when it comes to deck building. I will just never go above 50. Or if I have to go above 50, I probably am just dropping the deck. So that's the reason why 3 Bean, it's like we just cut it down to 50 and cut it down to 3 beans, basically. You could arguably put the Self-Awakener into the side deck because it's best 1 pre-side and run 4 Bean, but I feel like Bean is not a hugely relevant card in the format right now. There are some decks where it's really good against, namely yellow decks, but you only ever really need to see like 2 or 3 copies in a game. You never need to see 4 copies of this card. Because you just use like 1 on the turn leading up to their kill turn, and then 1 or 2 on the turn that is their kill turn, or even you just use like 1 or 2 on the turn that is their kill turn, and it gets you out of most situations. Also, this is like really late into the deck profile, but I have to give a huge shout out to Tom Smith for helping me build this deck and working on it with me. Yeah, great friend of mine. I'm sure you guys who've watched my channel for any amount of time have probably seen me play against him in some of the webcam locals that I play in. Our games are always the most fun because we end up yelling at each other. So I'm sure from that you can probably tell who he is. But yeah, got to give a massive shout out to Tom Smith because he also took this deck to the regionals and we worked on it for the weeks leading up to it. Yeah. Anyways, back to the deck profile. Into the Z deck, we have 1 Surmounting the Impossible. So again, just need another Self-Awakener. We were considering side decking this for a little while, but then we just found that in like almost every matchup it comes in, so we just put it into the main deck. Not that it matters, because again, it's best of one pre-side, but it saves us time when we're sideboarding. And then the 1/2-drop Android 21 Z battle card. So this is obviously works in this leader as well as the new Android 21 deck. And it gets you a ramp, but it can also take you a life, which is much more impactful in this deck than the new one, because you want to be at 6 life to awaken. There's no alternative awakening in this deck, so this card, like, a lot of the time there were turns where I just like turn 1 surmounting just so that I can guaranteed awaken next turn with the Z battle card if they're like not swinging at me or whatever. But if they're swinging at me, then you can just drop this turn 2, take a life down to 6, get the ramp off, and then you get the awaken, untap, draw 1. You get your when you bin an energy, you untap and draw 1 effectively. So by that point you can get like 1 to 2 energy and then use one of those to ramp 1 with this. And then we have 1 Beerus. This card doesn't really get played all that much, but it's obviously still good to have. But a lot of the time it's just used for a Z stack to give your 4-drop barrier, because we run 2 4-drop Z battle card Android 21s. So we're likely going to be using one of those to just hardcast it throughout our game, and then we can Z stack this to just give it barrier. 1 cell, we side the second, as you can see here, for matchups where you don't need the surmounting, which is pretty much just SS4 to be honest, but you know, good to have. 2 of the Android 21 Z battle card and 1 of the Vegito. Vegito is a huge card if you can ever establish it. It's like game winning when this card sticks for a turn or more, because this deck is inherently hand controlling, and then this just adds to that as like also a threat. So that's huge. And then the Android 21 Z battle card, obviously you want to ideally play 1 off of the 2-drop, but there are times where that's not going to go off. You're playing against yellow, they play T-Blow, you're playing against red, they play the Gohan counterplay. Like, there's a lot of interaction for this kind of card nowadays. So you're not going to get the ramp off a lot, to be honest, but you do hardcast this for 4 quite a lot. And the fact that it's a blocker is actually hugely relevant because of the Zamasu Unison here, and because of the fact that you have the Trading Places promo as well. This is what makes the deck sometimes a little bit stupid and uninteractable, is if you can get these 3 cards sorted. If you have the blocker, whether it has barrier or not doesn't matter, as long as your opponent is struggling to remove it, basically. But ideally you give it barrier if you've hardcasted it. If you haven't, then you just have it down earlier, which is again nice. You have the Unison down, and then you have this card in your hand, or on the board, I guess. But it means that if they're targeting your Unison, you can block one of the attacks with this, and then combo this to bin an energy and swap an energy, and then trigger your Unison +1 to draw a card, and trigger your leader to draw a card, which again is gonna, like, effectively it pluses you 1, because you lose this card, you swap an energy with a card in your hand, and you draw 2. So effectively it pluses you 1, but it also gives your Unison an uptick, which makes it again harder to kill. And the games that this deck really snowballs away is where the Unison just like lives for turns without being contested. So that's where this deck's power really comes from, is if they are struggling to deal with the Unison, and that blocker makes it so much harder to do that because of the existence of this card now, and because this card effectively just becomes a 0 mana, swap a card in your hand with a card in your energy, and then also draw 2 cards, and then also give your Unison a marker and restand it if you need the blocker. So that's what makes this deck a little bit dumb sometimes, is the fact that if you get that ramp off early and you can also get the blocker out early, they're going to struggle to remove it because it's so much earlier on. But also if you get to the point where you can establish a Unison and hardcast the 4-drop Z battle card to give barrier and make it a barrier blocker, that's when the deck, like, that's pretty much the stabilization points of the deck. So going into the side deck, like I said, we have the 1 cell. This is, again, basically for SS4, because every other matchup we just want the surmounting in. So arguably this could come out. I'm not really sure what I'd replace it with. There's still a lot of things to try out in this deck. But right now I want to stick it to 50 cards, and I want to stick it to... Obviously, there's only so many cards you can run if you run a deck at 50 cards, because then you only have the sideboard for flexibility spaces rather than going to like 51 or 52. The Goku's Kamehameha Deflection, this card has just been, yeah, a very strong addition to green, but an even stronger addition to green-blue, because green-blue has more energy and doesn't have like can struggle with removal a lot more than green can. So this just kind of solves that, and it adds more defense to an already defensive strategy and color combination. The second Android 17, like I said, I'd probably main deck more going into a best of 3 format, but it's best of 1 pre-side, so it really doesn't matter. And then for other Self-Awakeners, the 3 Gohans. So this is a really old card, which I'll run through quickly, but it's got an activate main. You pay a green, you send this from your hand to the warp, and then at the end of your opponent's next turn, this card plays itself from the warp. And then on play, it's got an auto where you can take up to 2 life. So the theory behind this card is just that turn 1, you charge a check land, and then you warp it from your hand, and then at the end of your opponent's next turn, you can play it and take 2 life and go down to 6, and then you can awaken. So it kind of prevents any sort of interaction with like your opponent trying to steal your awaken or anything like that. There are counterplays to this card, but they do have to do it in window 1, which would be when the effect is declared, so when you warp the card from your hand initially. So if you're going first and you do this turn 1, there's nothing they can do to stop it really. And if you're going second, then it has to be met with a card like T-Blow basically. But yeah, just another Self-Awakener, takes 2 life rather than 1, but can be counterplayed. And if it does get counterplayed, then you don't get to take the life, whereas this card you still do. So that's kind of the pros and cons of the 2 cards. And also the Android 17 is searchable off of your Android deck, basically. And then going into the rest of the deck, we have 2 Majin Boos. This deck can struggle to deal with unisons if you're playing against like any deck that can establish a sticky unison and then also back it up with a floodgate, because this deck really can't swing through floodgates. It's a very slow deck, and it aims to kill you with like bad omens and tap 7s. So you don't really have the pressure to like swing through a lot of floodgates a lot of the time. So if they have a unison and they back it up with like a riposte or a topo in red or whatever, you're not going to kill that unison. So this is kind of the answer to that, and it's also the answer to like just general board clears and also barrier, because barrier is a big problem for this deck. The only actual barrier removal this deck has is Beerus in the Z deck and the secret rare. And Beerus in the Z deck is very easy to counterplay, and the secret rare is a secret rare. You don't really want to just be using that as like, oh, I need to remove 1 barrier threat and I'm going to drop my secret rare. Like, that doesn't feel good ever. So this is kind of your answer to that, and it's also just like a great card. It adds to that hand control. It's really tricky to remove for a lot of decks. Yeah, very, very strong card, and very easy to sort out as well, because again, you're fixing your energy. So the 5 specified green, you charge like 2 check lands in the early turns, and then you just start fixing your energy from there with like any discard top 5 searches or super combos. And then in a lot of the same matchups that you're siding this card in, you're also siding this card in. So it's another mono green charge. So there were a lot of times where I just charged this as a mono green charge so that I can then tap 5 into this guy turn 5. Yeah, it's very strong. Only thing to note with this card is that it also clears your own board and unison. So if you have Zamasu down, it's a lot of the time not even worth dropping this card, because Zamasu is that strong of a unison if you have trading places and all that. And it'll also destroy your energy fixes, because it destroys the like trading places or the key channeler that have barrier. So you do then have to set those back up again. And it means that if you're dropping this on turn 5, it might mean that you have to go a turn without getting your leader draw and untap. But sometimes it's just worth it to do that anyways. This is a lot of the time just a comeback tool though, where they've been able to like develop a massive board and clear your board in unison, and then you just drop this and they discard 2 and they can't deal with this card and they've lost their entire advantage and you just win the game. And then 2 black smoke. Again, deck can struggle to deal with unisons if you don't get like the optimal setup, so it's just nice to have. Mainly this is for SS4 and Gamma, obviously, but because like Gamma can back up their unison with a floodgate almost every turn, so like I said, it's hard to swing through that. And then SS4, I mean, the fact that it's an uptick 2 with the SS4 unison, and then they have Gohan counterplay and Wolfang makes it pretty tricky to deal with, to be honest. And then the one during Survival of the Fittest, this was a very last minute addition to obviously play around Turning the Tide, because against a lot of blue decks, Turning the Tide is like the only way that they're ever going to win against you, because this deck naturally does very well into blue decks that aren't Android 21, the set 21, because it's hand control. So like stopping Turning the Tide come down, because this deck will go to Turning the Tide turns, is going to be very important. Never came up for me, but nice to have. A lot of the times I don't like cards like this though, because it's very rare that that kind of situation will come up, and there are things you can do to prevent it, like just trying to kill them faster or put them in a situation where even if they're turning the tide, as long as they don't have a board to kind of kill you on that same turn, you still win the game. And if you can like stick a unison down to prevent all of that, then yeah. So I don't really like cards like this, but it was a very last minute addition. We didn't really know what to put in the sideboard, and it works. It's a, you know, it stops one method of killing us, which is a very reliable one, to be honest. And then last two cards are 2 Dirty Burst, mainly in there for Golden Cooler, to be honest. I don't know if you side this in against Gogeta, because like I said, the deck space is very tight at the moment. There's very little room for siding cards in and out, and you already want to side in like the 3 Deflections and the 2 Black Smokes against Gogeta. So I don't know if there's space to side this card in against Gogeta, and you can also set it up where you just keep cycling Kotsupers back to your hand, and then as long as they're not like secret raring and Broly crowning you and dropping the 8-drop in the same turn, you can just like super combo out of the 8-drop attack if they use it. So I'm not sold on Dirty Burst in the SS4 matchup, surprisingly enough. But that's to be tested. I didn't get to play against Red on the weekend on the regionals, so unfortunately didn't get to kind of test that theory out. But going into the future, maybe I'll start siding in Dirty Burst against the big bad 8-drop in the format. But we'll see. It's still a very strong card, but it's mainly in there for Golden Cooler. But that's pretty much the deck profile. Like I said, I went 5-2 with the deck. Pretty happy with the results overall, because I did feel like my matchups were quite unfortunate with me pairing against 2 of the set 20 Android 21s and 1 of the mirror match as well. So I was quite frustrated with the matchups there, but is what it is. I'm sure next time I can play against some Red and kind of get some, like, figure out how those matchups go as well. But all in all, a very fun deck, very fun experience playing it in the regionals, and I highly recommend playing this deck as well. If you're looking for a blue deck that isn't Gamma, or a green deck that is good, basically, because it's a green deck, it's hand control. It's just a very slow blue-green deck, if you know what I mean. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the deck profile. I imagine there'll be probably some more games of this going up soon, because I'll probably be playing this deck quite a bit more. But I think I've already done some gameplay on it as well, if you guys want to check that out. But other than that, thank you guys very much for watching as always, and I'll be catching you guys in the next one.